Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Kimberly Hoeppner, and today is February 13th, 2014. When we're not on air, you can always go check out our information at www.arh.noaa.gov, or if you still like to get your information via the phone line, that's 1-800-472-0391. And as always, when we're not on air, you could always find our information at Facebook and YouTube, also Twitter, which all these feeds are available on our website. You can also type in weather.gov and navigate to the destination of your choice. Now on to the important information of the day. Okay, we have a few watches, warnings, and advisories out, and a couple of updates that didn't make it to my map. So just bear with me a moment. The warnings that we have across the southeastern coastal areas are for snow for Friday, starting midnight tonight and running through Friday, along with the areas highlighted across Juneau and including the northern Lynn Canal. These areas are under winter storm warnings for snow, expecting between 5 and 9 inches, possibly more in some areas. Also looking further out towards the west, other warnings that are out there are blizzard warnings for the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern part of the Aleutians. We've got blizzard warnings here. Blowing snow advisories across St. Paul. Most of the mainland areas are lit up because we have very, very cold temperatures and gusty north winds. So expect wind chills in the coldest areas to drop between below 40 to 60 below. And as we look further to the north, we have some snow advisories across the northeastern areas, and these are for winter storm advisories for snow in these areas and blowing snow. So as we look further to the west, once more blowing snow across the Pribilof Islands and a blizzard warning across the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. Here's looking at your satellite to see what kind of weather is on the front. You can see across the eastern parts of Russia here, there's a comma cloud that's developed right behind the ridge of high pressure that dominated across the Bering for the last couple weeks, actually. So this is beginning to break down across the Bering, some clouds streaming up along this low and streaming over the ridge that's breaking down across the western part of the Aleutians. Putting that in motion, you can watch that cloud spinning on its way into the northern parts of the eastern Russia area, Kamchatka Peninsula. Looking out across the North Pacific, there's some drier air just on the subsident side of the ridge. And taking a look closer back home, just a second, let this loop one more time. You can see the cold air across the eastern parts of the Aleutian chain and also the Alaska Peninsula have cold air that's just pushing down through this area, as well as the state with some very cold air mass that's just settling in across this southern areas, with another comma cloud out here over a low circulation that's moving into the southeastern coastal areas. This is what brought the snow into the coast earlier today, and what will continue to bring snow and possible some rain showers as you make it further south towards the Dixon entrance, as warmer air is being pulled up from the North Pacific. But behind this, cold front has made it all the way through to Kodiak Island and much of the Gulf waters. And taking and looking at that, you can see the cold air just brings some low stratus across the central parts of the Bering and down on through the Alaska Peninsula. Putting that into motion one more time. Just in case you didn't see that circulation, we're going to be focusing on this as we go through the next few days for bringing most of the weather across the south and central parts of the state. Now for today, we had this low pressure that developed across the western parts of the Gulf of Alaska. Here's the cold front that pushed on through the Alaska Peninsula. Some blowing snow conditions all across the eastern parts of the Bering. And as you look towards the east, here's the area where the snow, a frontal boundary that had pushed on land, is starting to weaken this evening. And the next surface low that'll be moving north is this one down here in the northeastern Pacific. This will be riding north behind it. So across the interior parts of the state today, we saw some snow and blowing snow across the Alaska Range and across the areas of the Brooks Range on over towards the Seward Peninsula and into the Bering Strait. Very windy conditions here and cold and snowy across the northeast as well. So looking further to the west across the rest of the Bering, it had some snow, but a mix of rain and snow as you headed to this warmer air mass out towards the low pressure that's moving into the Kamchatka Peninsula. As we head into tonight, we'll still see this rain and snow mix, maybe possibly edging into the western part of the Aleutians. But ahead of this, a little bit of a break in the precipitation as the low system is mainly across the western part of the Gulf. This here is going to really remain planted as we go through the next few days and mainly bring up new pressure systems that'll come on and rotate around to the northern Gulf. And for tonight, we'll see some lighter showers tapering off across the southeast, but as we go into the early morning hours tomorrow, the snow will start increasing beyond the increase again. Some of the snow is going to make it along to towards the Prince William Sound, but mainly along the eastern Alaska Range we'll see snow, but downsloping on the west side of the mountains as you head on the backside of this low pressure system. But some weak waves of energy will propagate through and around this low pressure system. So it just brings some showery conditions mainly across the mountainous areas and passes, and the colder temperatures will just continue to move down through the Alaska Peninsula with some light snow just continuing through reducing visibilities in this area. As we head into your Friday, the snow will begin to taper off across the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. However, we do have this low pressure system that will be bringing a lot more snow as you continue through your day across the southeastern areas back through near Prince William Sound with some shower activity making it to the Kenai Peninsula and parts of Kodiak Island. As we look to the north, a little bit drier to the north, but some showers as this low pressure system is dominating the interior parts of the state. And along the northwestern coast, a tight pressure gradient stays along here, so we'll see some blowing snow action. Across much of the Bering, we'll see some breaks in between the precipitation with the other front picking up the wind speeds from the central Aleutians and westward as this next occluded front originating from the eastern parts of Russia comes moving through. And then as we head through your day into Saturday, look for this pressure system to continue to move towards a little bit closer towards the Pribilof Islands, but showery conditions will be moving across as we have a northerly flow that will continue. The cold air mass is going to stay in place all across the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, but no major snow accumulations expected here for Saturday. Saturday, the main focus is going to be on this front that pushes inland, and this low here is going to deepen to a 965 millibar, bring a possible rain mix, and then as this front pushes inland where the colder temperatures are, should mainly be all snow along the inner channels and as you push into the east. Along the south central and southeastern areas should see some snow, with the heaviest snow staying from Valdez mainly and east along the east along the Alaska Range. Some shower activity also expected as this pressure gradient tightens and some cooler temperatures drop south. We'll see some light snow showery activity mainly along the Brooks Range and gusty conditions continuing all across through the Bering Strait. Okay, now taking a look at your temperatures for today. It was warmest across the southeastern areas with a 41 degree temperature reported at Haida Gwaii. Across the coastal areas, a slow trend back towards the 20s from the mid-30s to lower 30s across the southeast. Across the interior areas, much colder, all temperatures below zero from -1 to -20 degrees. And as you look to the north, -20 across the Brooks Range to the lower, actually the 35 below zero was reported, and near Port Lay this afternoon, the lowest temperature was -37 degrees. All these temperatures are really cold back towards the Seward Peninsula and then slowly warm as you drop towards the southwest, with temperatures mainly near -10 and just near zero as you head towards the Alaska Peninsula, with temperatures across the peninsula around 10 degrees, a little bit warmer over the Pribilof Islands, 17 to 19 degrees. The Aleutian Chain mainly saw temperatures today in the mid-20s and mid-30s. Looking at your temperatures for tonight, temperatures are not going to change much across the Aleutian Chain. And then across the Alaska Peninsula and the southwestern areas should see temperatures dropping to -10 to -20 degrees. And don't forget, with those gusty, windy conditions, we'll see wind chills dropping down to -30 to -50 in the southwest. Interior areas with temperatures dropping into the 20s, we'll possibly see wind chills here to -60 along the northern coast in the -30 degree range, so very chilly as you go to the north. And across the southeast, temperatures only in the teens to the mid-30s. As I said, little chance for some mixed precip as you head to the southern parts of the southeast as we head into your Friday. Now, temperatures for tomorrow are going to climb up into the mid-30s possibly. Might see some cooler temperatures as you head to the north, and then across the coastal areas mainly in the lower 20s, and across the interior near -20 degrees all through the northwest. Across the southwest, temperatures will only get to around -10 degrees or slightly lower, and then the Alaska Peninsula warms up to 10 to 20 degrees there. And across the Bering and central Aleutians, around 20 degrees and slightly warmer as you head to the west in the mid-30s. Now, looking at your flying weather for tomorrow, MVFR conditions across much of the Bering, with IFR conditions along the Alaska Peninsula and Pribilofs, where we have the blizzard warnings out through midday tomorrow. Across the Gulf of Alaska, also MVFR conditions here. And then some MVFR conditions just south of the Brooks Range and just to the north of the Brooks Range, with IFR possible in just the central areas of the Brooks Range. And looking at your passes in more depth, we have IFR possibly going over to MVFR conditions for Anahtuvik, and then Adigan Pass will stay MVFR for most of the day and possibly break out to VFR conditions in the afternoon. And then looking at Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, MVFR to VFR conditions in the afternoon, and Rainy will be MVFR to VFR. Windy Pass will also be MVFR to VFR, and then Isabel Pass will be MVFR to VFR. Looking at Mentasta, MVFR to VFR as well, and looking at Tanita Pass, MVFR all day, and Portage will be MVFR with VFR conditions improving along the west entrance. Chilkoot and White Pass, IFR and going to MVFR. All right, the freezing levels tomorrow is pretty much staying the same surface level right across the southern parts of the Bering, with the 2,000-foot level along the chain and higher to the south, and then the 2,000-foot level along the Dixon entrance. Looking at your icing for tomorrow in the areas of the front along the southeastern coast and across the south, and across the Alaska Peninsula below 8,000 feet here, and then across the western parts of the Bering. Looking at your tomorrow's jet stream, we'll have a northwesterly flow coming out of the southeast as you head over the southeastern areas, with a 130 knot jet on the eastern part of the Aleutians. And looking at your 9,000 foot level winds, you can really see this low pressure system as the winds wrap around it with a 40 to 60 knot jet on the southeastern side of this low, and across the Bering mainly a northerly flow here between 30 and 45 knots across much of this area. And then your 3,000 foot winds will be out of the north to northeast as you head around towards the eastern part of the Bering, and then across the Gulf waters and into the southeast, the strongest winds will be between 45 to 60 knots. And then looking at your turbulence for tomorrow, looking at below 4,000 feet across the Bering Strait and across the interior, with some moderate areas of turbulence across the west coast areas, and including the Alaska Peninsula with a possible isolated severe conditions, and then also light conditions all across the southeastern coastal areas of the Gulf. And then all across the Bering, we're expecting some light turbulence here. All right, we'll be back in just a moment with your marine forecast.
The false dusk, and the moon finds 4 fabulous planets.
Hey there, stargazers. I'm Marlene Hidalgo, science teacher from Miami, Florida. We're here to talk about the false dusk of Omar Khayyam.
I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. Next week, you'll be able to see the false dusk because the moon will be out of the night sky and out of the way.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Plot Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We're going to show you how to use that out-of-the-way moon to find 4 planets.
Let's get started.
We're facing west after it gets dark. You must have a dark sky, free of city lights, to see this false dusk. A good test for your sky is whether you can see the Milky Way. It will start at the horizon in the northwest, pass high overhead, and then drop down and hit the horizon again in the southeast.
If you can't see the Milky Way, assuming it's clear and cloud-free, my suggestion is to get in your car and go find some dark. You may have to drive a good distance, but believe me, it will be worth it.
Many people don't know what a good dark sky looks like because they've never seen one. Most people in the U.S. live in a fairly urbanized, that is, well-lit area. Let's take a quick look at a satellite view of North America at night.
Wow, I hadn't realized that there was that much wasted light being sprayed out into the sky.
Yeah, just think of how many power plants it takes to produce that much wasted light. It isn't doing anybody any good on the ground.
Let's say you can see the Milky Way. Then just take your time and let your eyes get used to the dark. Turn off the flashlights, the headlights, the phone screens, and just soak up some dark.
Facing west after it gets dark, you may see a rather rare sky phenomenon. Starting at the horizon and extending up about halfway in the sky, look for a faint rounded pyramid of light. Higher in the west, you should see the Pleiades. Now, the false dusk doesn't extend this high up, so concentrate your search below the Pleiades.
It's also called the zodiacal light, and it's the result of sunlight reflecting off of dust particles that lie in the plane of the orbits of the planets. It is visible every night throughout the year from a dark location, but in the spring and the fall, it's at its best.
Because it's straight up from the horizon. During summer and winter, the zodiacal light lies at an angle and doesn't reach so high.
Okay, we've established that this false dusk is a neat thing to see, but most of our stargazers live in areas where they just can't see it. We've got to do better.
Okay, let's focus on the planets. The next few weeks give us a rare opportunity to see all 5 planets from sunset to the following sunrise.
And the moon will help us spot the dim ones.
Okay, planet number 1 is Jupiter. It'll be nearly overhead after sunset when you go out to look for the false dusk, so we won't need any help from the moon for Jupiter.
The others are early morning things, so plan accordingly. You're looking south on the 19th at 6 a.m. and a waning moon will be just to the right of Mars. The next day, the 20th, the moon will be to the left of Mars.
The next day, the 21st, the moon will be to the right of Saturn, and then the following day will be to the left of Saturn and will be at last quarter.
Let's skip a few days and look southeast on the morning of February 25th, and a really skinny moon will be just to the right of Venus. And surprise, surprise, on the 26th, it will be to the left of Venus and will be even skinnier.
The last planet will be very low in the pre-dawn sky, but the moon will still help us find Mercury. Get out at around 5:40 on the morning of February 27th, and the super skinny moon will be just a bit up and to the right of Mercury. The following morning, Mercury will be a bit higher at the same time, but the moon will be so close to the sun that it will probably be a no-show.
So, to see the false dusk,
And all 5 planets,
keep looking up.
Hello, welcome back to the show and welcome to your marine forecast. As we look across the southeastern parts of the Gulf of Alaska, we'll see stronger winds in the morning around 25 knots and north around 20 knots. And then along the inner channels, look for a north to east wind at first, and we'll see 25 knots tapering off to 20 knots in the afternoon, and around 20 knots as you head towards the Dixon entrance out of the southeast with seas around 4 to 10 feet, higher seas between 9 and 10 feet across the outer waters, and then across the inner channels around 5 feet as you head towards the north. And looking at your Saturday, a little bit stronger winds across the inner channels, north 25 to 30 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas. And as you head towards the Dixon entrance, 40 knots with slightly higher gusts, 8-foot seas here. And across the outer waters between 45 and 50 knots. So we're looking at storm level winds across the eastern parts of the Gulf with seas between 22 to 29 feet as you head towards the northern parts of the Gulf. Looking at your south central areas, between 20 to 25 knots and higher winds between 25 and 30 knots as you head towards Kodiak Island. Across Shelikof Strait and the Barren Islands between 25 and 35 knots and gale warning criteria here, and small crafts across the Cook Inlet 30 knots, and winds will primarily be out of the north with a little bit of a difference across the central parts of the Gulf where you'll see winds out of the south and southeast. 4 to 10 foot seas across the western parts of the Gulf, and higher seas still across the Cook Inlet between 8 and 6 feet. Shelikof Strait 8 feet, and then as we head into your Saturday, winds taper off just slightly out of the north and northwest out from 20 to 25 knots, a little bit stronger across the Barren Islands between 25 and 30 knots, and also along the western parts of the Gulf, 25 knots with 20 knots out of the east across the Prince William Sound. Now seas will be between 8 and 17 feet with swells higher in the northern parts of the Gulf, and Shelikof Strait between 5 and 9 feet across the Barren Islands, Cook Inlet between 4 and 5 feet. Looking out across the Alaska Peninsula, primarily a northerly flow to northwest with gale criteria across the Alaska Peninsula around 35 knots. And then seas will be between 5 and 13 feet on the Bering side and 10 to 11 feet on the Pacific side. Heading into your Saturday forecast, pretty much the same. Out of the north between 20 and 30 knots, so looking at small crafts mainly, 9 to 11 feet across the entire area. Looking across the Aleutians, we're going to see some gales as you go to the western and central Aleutians with that next front moving up. And then 30 knots on average across the central Aleutians, with seas across the Bering between 8 and 15 feet until you head towards the very western areas with seas 20 feet. Along the Pacific side, seas will be between 10 and 12 feet. Looking at your Saturday forecast, more of a northerly directions for all locations to northwest. Gales across the central and western Aleutians at 35 knots, small crafts as you head towards the eastern part of the chain between 25 and 30 knots. Seas on the Bering side will mainly be between 11 and 15 feet until you head out towards the west between 19 and 25 feet. Along the northern Pacific areas between 10 and 17 with feet with the highest seas as you head towards the west. And looking at your western coastal areas, winds will be primarily from the north direction here between 20 and 35 knots, the strongest winds across the Mercuric area. And we still have some ice across the northern parts of the Bering, but the ice-free waters we'll see between 4 and 9 feet for their seas. Freezing spray also is going to be a concern all across the eastern parts of the Bering and Alaska Peninsula. Looking at your Saturday forecast, northerly winds once again gale criteria as you head towards St. Matthew Island, with seas between 8 and 12 feet on Saturday. Looking across your north slope area, looking at 15 knots out of the northeast, and as you wrap around towards the towards the Chukchi Sea area, looking at 25 knots out of the north and northeast. Ice covered in all of these areas with slightly higher winds across the northwestern coastal areas, Kotzebue Sound between 30 and 35 knots here and 15 to 20 knots elsewhere. A quick recap on your weather for tonight. Expect some light scattered shower activity across much of the places inland and coastal areas with the blowing snow along the western parts of the coast through the Alaska Peninsula. Blizzard warnings here will expire by midday tomorrow, blowing snow across the Pribilofs. The Gulf waters, you'll see another low developing and pushing towards the eastern part of the Gulf area as this front in place, it begins to deteriorate overnight. And here's this next front that pushes in for your Friday forecast. Snow will mainly be heavy across the southeastern areas, lighter snow as it wraps around the backside of this low here, and then light snow across the northeastern parts of the state and blowing snow all across the northwest. Across the Alaska Peninsula, we'll see some blowing snow here continue, with some snow activity with the next front pushing across the western parts of the Bering. Thank you for staying with us tonight. I'm meteorologist Kimberly Hoeppner, and I will be back with you next week, but Dave Snyder will be back with you to talk about the front that'll be moving across the Bering area, and also the low pressure systems that will continue across the Gulf of Alaska into the beginning of your weekend.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.